A single dry crack echoes through the pines, and a general's skull vanishes. It wasn't a carpet bomb that stopped the invasion. It was a heartbeat paused in the freezing mud. How did the world's most expensive war machine, a billion-mark predator of iron and ego, lose its mind to a 9-gram scrap of lead? It wasn't just a casualty, it was a tactical suicide. We are told that steel wins wars, yet an entire empire was paralyzed by a silence they couldn't map. But the cameras were looking at the tanks. They missed the ink-stained fingers of a schoolgirl wrapped around a cold bolt-action rifle. The establishment ignored the warning because the Reaper wore a skirt and braids. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. March 1942. Moscow is a city of iron and frost, breathing through a thick veil of charcoal smoke. On the maps of the Soviet High Command, the front line is a jagged, weeping wound stretching 1,000 miles. The Red Army is a bleeding giant, stumbling backward under the methodical hammer blows of the Wehrmacht. The meat grinder of the Eastern Front has a bottomless appetite. Every hour, another battalion is pulverized into the gray slush of the steppe. The Stavka, the Soviet Supreme Command, looks at the ledger of the dead and makes a chillingly logical calculation. They don't need more bodies for the bayonet charge. They need a surgical strike. They need to decapitate the German machine, one officer at a time. They turn to the invisible elite, the women. The transformation begins in the mud of Veshyaki, a training ground that smells of wet wool, wood smoke, and the sharp metallic tang of cordite. Here, the state strips away the identity of students, weavers, and librarians to reveal something far more lethal. It is a silent revolution. While the men are forged for the thunder of the frontal assault, these girls are being refined for the surgical removal of the enemy's will. They are teenagers. Some are barely 17. They should be dreaming of the spring thaw or the hum of a quiet classroom. Instead, they are taught the iron discipline. It is a brutal, dehumanizing curriculum. They are forced to remain motionless in the freezing slush for 48 hours, letting the frost bite into their skin without moving a single muscle. They learn to let insects crawl across their eyes without blinking. They learn to ignore the scream of their own lungs for air. To twitch is to die. To breathe too deeply is to be found. The tool of their trade is the Mosin Nagant M9130. It is a heavy, stubborn relic of the Tsarist era. To understand why it killed, you have to understand its mechanical treachery. Think of the bolt like a rusted garden gate. It requires a sharp, violent tug to chamber the next round. But the weapon isn't the steel, it's the optics. The PU 3.5X scope narrows the vast chaotic war into a single, suffocating circle. The physics are cold and unforgiving. A bullet leaves the muzzle at twice the speed of sound, but over 500 yards, the air itself becomes a thick, invisible wall, dragging the lead downward in a predictable, deadly arc. If the sniper miscalculates the wind by the width of a finger, the bullet misses. If they miss, the muzzle flash reveals their position, and the German counter-snipers do not take prisoners. A young recruit, barely 5 feet tall with her hair shorn into a jagged bob, stands before a colonel whose chest is heavy with the weight of Soviet medals. He is the personification of the old guard. He looks at her slight frame, her hands which still look like they should be holding a pen, and he scoffs. "This is a weapon of the state," he barks, his voice thick with the smell of cheap tobacco. "It requires the shoulder of a man to absorb the kick. You will break like a dry twig before you ever see a German." He prioritizes the manual over the person. He sees a girl where he should see a reaper. But while the generals scream for more artillery and more tanks, these girls are already in the shadows, mastering the silence that will soon paralyze an empire. They are learning to become the invisible horror. The state has given them a rifle, but it is their own patience that will turn them into ghosts. They are becoming the elite, yet the establishment still views them as a desperate experiment. As the first graduates prepare to head to the front, the officers at the rail stations offer patronizing smiles and extra rations of chocolate. They treat the deployment like a tragic comedy. They have fatally underestimated the boss that is now entering the woods. The German officers in the distance are currently toasting to their inevitable victory, dismissing the Soviet infantry as a broken rabble. They believe the silence in the trees is a sign of submission. They believe they have conquered the land. They are wrong. The forest isn't empty. It is watching. While the system screamed in panic, these girls were already in the dark, holding the silence that would save them. The instructors taught them to read the wind like a secret language. A slight breeze can push a bullet 3 inches off course at 500 yards. The difference between a kill and a confession. They learn to synchronize their heartbeat with the trigger pull, finding the tiny, still space between pulses where the world stops spinning. They were told they were fragile. They were told they were a last resort. But as the trains rattle toward the front lines of Belarus, the girls are not looking at the chocolate in their laps. They are looking at their cleaning kits. They are checking the tension in their springs. The era of the mass charge is ending. The era of the ghost is about to begin. The instructors dismiss their empathy as a weakness. They believed women were too soft for the black box of the kill, the moment where the trigger is pulled and the life is extinguished. But they forgot one thing. A mother knows the value of a single life, and she knows exactly where to aim to take it away. June 1944. The heat in the forests of Belarus is a physical weight, thick with the scent of pine resin and the sweet, cloying rot of unburied machinery. The air is so still it feels brittle, as if the world is waiting for a single glass thread to snap. To the German Wehrmacht, this forest is a green hell. They are the masters of industrial warfare, a system built on the precise synchronization of radio, armor, and ironclad hierarchy. Their officers move with the confidence of men who believe they are protected by the sheer complexity of their own machine. They stand behind reinforced concrete and deep trenches, following a manual that says no individual can stop a division. But the manual was written by men who have never been hunted. While the Red Army prepares the massive thunder of Operation Bagration, 1 million men and thousands of tanks, the real terror is already behind the lines. It moves without a sound. It doesn't use radio. It doesn't need a supply chain. It is the invisible horror. Among them is a 20-year-old former kindergarten teacher named Rosa Shanina. To the Soviet state, she is a propaganda icon, But in the shadows of the Belarusian pines, she is a tactical pioneer who is rewriting the physics of the kill. She has developed a technique that the German survivors will later describe in whispers as the doublet. The logic of the sniper is usually one of patience. One shot, one kill, then vanish. The system of counterfire is built on that assumption. Once a shot is fired, the enemy has a window to find the muzzle flash and retaliate. But Rosa doesn't follow the window. She shatters it. The Rui doublet is a lethal innovation of 2 shots fired within a single respiratory cycle. To understand the black box of this failure for the victim, you must understand the mechanical betrayal of the rifle. The mechanism of death. A standard Mosin-Nagant bolt is a stubborn piece of cold steel. Normally, the recoil of the first shot throws the shooter's eye off the scope. But Rosa doesn't fight the kick. She absorbs it into her frame like a spring. She cycles the bolt in a blur of muscle memory brass ejects, lead chambers, and she fires again before the sound of the first crack has even hit the trees. 2 targets, 2 seconds, 1 breath. For the German officers, the black box is a total system failure. They hear a single shot and duck, believing they have time to react. They are wrong. By the time their brain registers the first sound, the second bullet is already halfway through its flight. The machine of their defense is too slow for the intuition of the hunter. A German Oberst, a man who has spent 20 years perfecting the art of the defensive line, stands near a command tent. He is the personification of the establishment. He dismisses the reports of phantom snipers as the hysterics of tired conscripts. The Bolsheviks are a blunt instrument, he tells his adjutant, adjusted his ironed collar. They know only the mass charge. They have no grace for the rifle. He treats the silence of the forest as a sign of his own superiority, but he has fatally underestimated the boss that is now watching him through a circle of glass. It isn't a peasant with a rifle. It is a woman who has replaced her heartbeat with the rhythm of the trigger. He believes he is safe because the manual says snipers don't operate in this sector. The forest respects no manual. While the German high command screams into their radios for reinforcements, Rosa is already in the dark, holding the silence that will end them. She isn't looking for the soldiers. She is looking for the officers. She is looking for the brain of the machine. In the ruins of bombed-out villages and the emerald shadows of the woods, she operates with a terrifying tactical autonomy. The system tried to train her to be a soldier, to follow orders, to be a cog, but Rosa found a cognitive bridge. Because she had spent her life as a teacher, she understood the psychology of the group. She didn't see an army, she saw a classroom. She knew that if you remove the teacher, the officer, the students fall into chaos. She saw the pattern in the movement that the experts missed. While the generals saw a front line, she saw the one man whose death would make 100 others run. The yes but of her existence becomes a constant struggle. Every time she secures a sector, the Red Army pushes forward and the system tries to pull her back into the ranks. They want her for parades. They want her to kiss babies for the cameras. Yes, you are our greatest hunter, they tell her, but you are too valuable to risk in the mud. Rosa's response is a quiet, cold fury. She slips away from her handlers. She goes hunting without permission. She chooses the danger of the forest over the safety of the propaganda office. She knows that the moment she becomes a symbol, she stops being a weapon. As June bleeds into July, the invisible horror becomes a psychological plague. German soldiers begin to refuse to step into the open. They stop smoking at night because a glowing ember is a death sentence. They stop standing straight in the trenches. The massive German war machine, built to conquer continents, is being paralyzed by a handful of girls who move like shadows. But the hubris of the system is a resilient thing. Even as their comrades fall, the German commanders refuse to believe they are being outclassed by irregulars. They claim the disaster is impossible because their security protocols are perfect. They treat the deaths as anomalies, as bad luck, as anything other than the truth. The truth is that the boss, the reality of the battlefield, is punishing their pride. It doesn't care about their ranks or their protocols. It only cares about the 2 seconds of breath that Rosa Shanina has mastered. The German machine is screaming in panic, its gears grinding against the grit of 100 well-placed bullets. But as the Red Army nears the border of East Prussia, the shadow is deepening. The hunters are becoming the hunted, and the price for their lethal autonomy is about to be collected in the most brutal currency imaginable. July 5th, 1944. The village of Pekalin is a smudge of charcoal on the horizon. The Soviet advance has moved past this point, a tidal wave of steel rolling toward the heart of the Reich. But in the wake of the wave, there are pockets of stagnant, deadly water. Among the ruins is Tatiana Baramina. She is 24 years old. Before the war, she was a quiet girl from the Udmurt Republic, the kind of person you would pass on the street without a second thought. Now, she is a legend of the 70th Rifle Division. But today, the long-distance geometry of the sniper has collapsed into a visceral, close-quarters nightmare. She is not hunting officers in the trees. She is in a makeshift hospital guarding 200 wounded men who cannot walk. The system, the massive Red Army, has surged forward, leaving this tiny cell of humanity behind in a logistical blind spot. Suddenly, the silence of the village is shattered. A column of several thousand German soldiers, remnants of the Fourth Army, are attempting a desperate breakout. They are trapped, starving, and possessed by a cornered animal's ferocity. They stumble upon the hospital. The black box of this moment is a failure of scale. One woman, one rifle, thousands of enemies. Tatiana does not retreat. She takes her position in the dust and the heat. She fires until the barrel of her Mosin Nagant is too hot to touch. When the ammunition for her rifle runs dry, she doesn't stop. She picks up an American-made anti-tank rifle. The recoil is enough to shatter a collarbone, but she fires it from the shoulder, the massive rounds tearing through the advancing line. She holds them back. She buys the wounded the only thing the state couldn't provide: time. But the machine of the Wehrmacht is too heavy. Eventually, the weight of numbers overcomes the precision of the individual. Tatiana is captured. The retaliation is not a soldier's death. It is a sadistic expression of the system's wounded pride. The German officers, humiliated by the invisible horror that has decimated their ranks for years, do not see a combatant. They see an anomaly that must be erased. They subject her to an ordeal that transcends the horrors of the battlefield, an execution so brutal that when her comrades find her body the next day, they can only identify her by her hair and the scraps of her uniform. It is the climax of the cruel irony. The woman who saved hundreds of lives through the ultimate discipline of silence is silenced forever by a noise she couldn't outrun. The war ends in a cacophony of victory. May 1945. Berlin is a graveyard of brick and ash. The Soviet banners fly over the Reichstag, and the world celebrates the triumph of the system. The massive machine has won. But for the women who pulled the triggers, the victory has a bitter aftertaste. As the smoke clears, the Soviet state, the same Goliath that forged these girls into reapers, begins to feel a different kind of fear. These women are no longer students or weavers. They are elite warriors who have looked into the eyes of death and didn't blink. They have tasted an autonomy that the Soviet hierarchy cannot tolerate. The order comes down, not in a scream, but in a whisper of paperwork. The sniper schools are shuttered. The female units are disbanded. The girls are sent back to the villages, back to the classrooms, back to the kitchens. They are told to forget. The system that used their bodies as shields now views their trauma as an embarrassment. While the male veterans are given medals and positions of power, the women are often met with a suspicious silence. In many towns, a woman returning from the front is seen not as a hero, but as something broken or soiled by the proximity to the kill. Rosa Shanina didn't live to see this betrayal. She fell in the mud of East Prussia, her diary full of a lonely, haunting fatigue. But for those who survived, the real war began in the peace. They buried their medals in the bottom of cedar chests. They stopped talking about the doublet or the windage on a 500-yard shot. They became the invisible elite once again, but this time they were hiding from their own people. We see this same hubris in our society today. We celebrate the massive organizations, the billion-dollar brands, and the grand political movements. We focus on the noise of the system, but we forget that every system is built on the silent labor and the silent sacrifice of those it considers disposable. We ignore the warnings of the underdogs until the disaster is already upon us. The story of the Soviet snipers is a mirror. It asks us, who are the ghosts in our machines today? And whose silence are we currently mistaking for submission? How does history reconcile the image of a kindergarten teacher who became a nation's most lethal weapon, only to be erased by the very state she saved? The truth isn't found in the monuments of Moscow. It's found in the quiet corners of forgotten cemeteries, where the wind whispers through the pines. And for a moment, if you listen closely, the silence feels like a held breath. If you believe that stories like Tatiana Baramina's and Rosa Shanina's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing and like this video to help the algorithm find others who care for the truth. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.